All right, let's jump back into our ASML Deep Dive series. This time, we're going to tackle a really important topic for figuring out ASML's long-term future: competition.
But first, the usual reminder. This is just for educational purposes. It's definitely not investment advice. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get into it.
So check this out. Over 90%. That's the slice of the advanced lithography market by value that ASML controls. I mean, that's just a staggering number. You almost never see that kind of dominance in any industry. And it really brings us to the big question for today, right? Is this monopoly actually unbeatable? Can anyone or anything even hope to compete?
Okay, so before we can even talk about a challenger, we have to understand just how massive ASML's fortress really is. We need to dig into the foundations of this monopoly, and that starts with their technology, a moat that's, almost legendary at this point.
And right at the heart of that moat is something called extreme ultraviolet lithography, or EUV. Look, put simply, if you want to make the most advanced computer chips in the world, the brains inside your phone and AI data centers, literally everything, you have to have EUV. And here's the kicker. This isn't just an advantage for ASML. It is an absolute monopoly. They are the only company on the entire planet that makes these machines. So you're probably wondering, why the monopoly? Well, it's because creating EUV light is just an insane feat of engineering. Picture this. Inside a perfect vacuum, a super high-powered laser zaps a microscopic droplet of molten tin 50,000 times a second. This vaporizes it into a plasma that's literally hotter than the surface of the sun. That plasma is what gives off the EUV light, which is then bounced around by the most perfect flattest mirrors ever created by humans. This is just mind-bogglingly complex. It's a physics puzzle that took ASML decades and, billions upon billions of dollars to crack. And here's what's so critical to understand. ASML's dominance isn't just about this one incredible technology. No, it's a fortress with many, many layers. On the tech front, they're not even sitting still. They're already rolling out the next generation of EUV. Then you've got the ecosystem. Their biggest customers, think Intel, TSMC, Samsung, are actually co-investors. They helped pay for the R&D, so they are completely locked in. And financially, well, their R&D budget is bigger than their competitors' total revenue. We'll get to that. And finally, they're the master conductors of this huge orchestra, a supply chain of almost 5,000 key companies. It's a whole interconnected system that's just incredibly hard to copy. Okay, so with a fortress that strong, what does the competition even look like? I mean, who would even try? Well, we have to look at the old guard, the companies that used to be the kings of this market, the Japanese giants, Nikon and Canon. Today, though, they're pretty much just fighting for relevance in ASML's massive shadow. And what's interesting is they're playing two totally different games. Nikon is going for what you might call sustaining innovation. They're trying to take the last-gen technology, DUV, and make it just a little bit better, trying to challenge ASML head-on in that specific niche. Canon, on the other hand, they're doing something else entirely. They're avoiding a direct fight. They're focusing on making the equipment for older, less advanced chips, but, and this is key, they're also making a super long-term, really risky bet on a completely new disruptive technology. And this chart, wow. This tells the whole story, doesn't it? When you look at the market by value, where the actual money is, ASML has more than 90%. Nikon and Canon are left fighting over what, a few percentage points each? It just perfectly shows why a direct, head-on fight is pretty much pointless. ASML just vacuums up all the profit in the industry, and then what do? They pour it right back into R&D to stay even further ahead. So this brings us right back to that big question. If the only two legacy competitors are basically on the sidelines, does that mean ASML is really truly unbeatable? Well, maybe. But what if the biggest threat isn't another company trying to build a better EUV machine? What if it's something that changes the rules of the game entirely? And that's where Canon's wildcard bet comes in. It's called Nanoimprint lithography. The whole idea here isn't to compete with EUV, it's to make it obsolete, to bypass it completely with a technology that's more like a super advanced microscopic stamp. So how does this nanoimprint lithography, or NIL, actually work? Well, forget all that crazy stuff with lasers and plasmas and billion-dollar mirror systems. NIL is mechanical. It's simple, really. You make a master template or mold with the circuit pattern you want, then you literally press it into a special liquid on the silicon wafer, you zap it with some UV light to harden it, and then you lift the mold off. It's a fundamentally different and way simpler way of thinking about the problem. And if it works, the potential upsides are just jaw-dropping. We're talking about machines that could be 40% cheaper and use 90% less power than an EUV system.
And because it's a physical stamp, it can create these really complex 3D shapes in a single step. Its resolution isn't even limited by the wavelength of light. It's just limited by how good you can make the stamp. I mean, this is the textbook definition of a disruptive technology. Okay, so if it's so amazing, why aren't we using it for everything? Well, because the challenges are absolutely huge. Since it's a direct contact process, it's super sensitive to defects. A single tiny speck of dust can wreck the mold and the chip. It's also way slower than just scanning with light. And trying to align layer after layer after layer with mechanical precision, it's a nightmare. These are the brutal, real-world problems that have kept NILs stuck in the R&D lab for decades. But now, a huge new factor has been thrown into the mix: geopolitics. The US and the Netherlands have blocked ASML from selling their best machines to China. And that has created this massive, desperate incentive for China to find another path forward. As you can see in this quote, they are pouring money and resources into alternatives, and NIL is at the top of the list. So in a strange twist, the export controls might be accidentally creating the world's biggest incubator for the one technology that could one day challenge ASML's throne. All right, so let's pull all of this together and look ahead. What does this all mean for the future? How do we actually size up the real long-term risks to ASML's incredible monopoly? This chart says it all, really. That big bar for ASML, that's their annual R&D budget, more than 6 billion euros. Those other bars for Nikon and Canon, that's not their R&D. That's their total revenue for the entire company. Just think about that. ASML spends more on research every year than Nikon makes in sales from their whole business, cameras, everything. That kind of financial firepower creates this powerful cycle of innovation that's it's almost impossible to break if you're trying to compete head-on. So, here's how we see the risk playing out over time. In the short term, say the next 1 to 3 years, the risk is basically zero. ASML's position with EUV and their next-gen machines is rock solid. In the medium term, maybe 3 to 7 years, the risk is low. The big test will be whether NIL can prove itself in a niche market, something like memory chips. But the real potential threat, that's in the long term, 7+ years out. That's where you could see a perfect storm forming. A mature, working NIL technology, a self-sufficient China that's using it at massive scale, and the cost of EUV just continuing to climb higher and higher. That is the one scenario that could finally put a crack in ASML's fortress. So the real question isn't just about whether ASML can be beaten by a competitor. The real question is whether geopolitics and a disruptive technology can combine to create the one challenger that even ASML's billions can't stop. And that's all for today. Tell us in the comments what other aspects of ASML you'd like us to analyze next. See you next time.